listening to Podium Podcast with Simon Hartley and Tom May. This is the show that invites the world's top athletes to discuss life in and after professional sport. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential Wealth Management. To find out more, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk.
Simon, a Fijian rugby shirt behind you.
Yeah. I was actually chatting to Ben this morning. It was 40 degrees over there, and it's grey outside and absolutely tipping it down here.
Yeah, great. It's about
there we go. I see you've been
36 degrees colder, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I see you've been living it up on the Autumn Internationals trail. It's hard life indeed, isn't it?
It's been good. I've been out to the last 3 games in Paris, Marseille, and Toulouse. So some good weekends.
Hard life.
I'll be off to Twickenham this weekend as we record this as well. So that'll be good. But to this podcast, Jack Green, double Olympian, probably should have gone to a third Olympics, but actually made the decision himself to leave sport. He's been fairly vocal about some of the tough times he faced with regard to mental health. I'm really looking forward to this. It'll be slightly different to what we've sort of recorded to date.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, credit to him for saying what many, many people experience but never talk about. I think this is going to be not just really interesting from our point of view, but incredibly valuable as well.
Definitely. Let's get stuck into it. Jack Green, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Tom. Obviously, we've met in the past, but new introduction for me was Simon.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, don't get too carried away yet. There's not a huge amount coming.
This could be underwhelming.
Yeah, I've introduced you to one of the greats. Jack, it's great to have you on the Podium Podcast with us. Been watching what you've been up to since retiring from sport. You have to give me an insight firstly, though. Now, we've talked to some rowers through this podcast. 400 metres is one of those events where it's just like, how? Because it's not now sort of, it's a sprint, isn't it? Where's the attraction? Because it's full on pain, isn't it?
There's no attraction whatsoever. It's ridiculous. I also put hurdles in the way, so I made it even worse. The fact that the event is nicknamed the Man Killer, I think, says it all, and the training's worse than the event. So, no, it's just one of those. It was always for me around what can I be the best at, and where can I, go to achieve my dreams. And unfortunately, it wasn't a 100-meter runner. Genetically, I was a 400-meter hurdler, and maybe that's why I was good, because no one else wanted to do it. So.
You did some relays as well, didn't you? Some flat 400s.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough compared to most hurdlers. Most hurdlers become hurdlers because they're tall and they're not fast enough on the 400. I probably shouldn't say that publicly, though. That's changed a lot with Carsten Warholm and all of those guys who are incredible on the flat as well. But I was very fortunate to be one of those who could run the relay as well as the hurdles, and got quite a few opportunities. Not as many as I'd like, but yeah, a few medals out of that.
And a couple of Olympics as well. You mentioned that the training is much harder than the event. Give us a bit of an insight into what sort of things your training would look like on a sort of week-to-week basis. Because as far as I can see, many people, and rightly so, from the outside in, look at sports people, and I know you only really see the sexy bit, the competition. Talk us through some of the graft that you really have to put in.
Yeah, so a typical week, I used to have Sundays off, but I train twice a day, every day, other than that Sunday. So Monday, you turn up in the morning, it's a speed session predominantly, it's when you're freshest, so we're doing that absolute speed work, and then gymming in the afternoon. Tuesday, then we kind of go to the well a little bit of speed endurance, a bit longer, and then some extra conditioning and various things in the afternoon. Wednesdays, bit more of an aerobic kind of active day to try and get that middle recovery. Gym again in the afternoon. Thursday is then back to the well and the horrible stuff. So as a 400-meter runner, you just do loads of 300-meter runs. It's just ridiculous. It's just lots of 300s with little recovery as fast as you can. Fridays would then be aerobics, so long runs, tempo sessions, as well as gym. And then Saturday was race day. Saturday was lactic, welcome to pain, all aboard the pain train as such. And it was not a fun day. But because you had the day off on the Sunday, all coaches are like, brilliant, that means we can flog you on Saturday.
Well, I think two visits to the well during the week must mean that there's some pretty significant pain during the week. Simon, that is, to me, is a demonstration about obviously the rigidity of an athlete's training week, but also the lengths that individual athletes have to go to be at the top of their tree. It's an interesting comparison, isn't it, to team sports?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I think they have to often just dig deeper. One of those skills is how deep can you dig? How far into that are you willing to go? And for many, it'd be interesting to get Jack's thoughts on this. That sometimes becomes their super strength. I can remember talking to the Brownlee brothers about, what gives them that sort of exceptional ability within triathlon. And they kind of said there's no real magic wand. It's just that we'll probably go further into that well, as Jack describes it, than most others will. And we'll go deeper. We'll stay there for longer. There's no real magic formula to it. That's really what we do. And I think they saw that as their super strength. I mean, what are your thoughts, Jack? I mean, you've been around, not just experienced this yourself, but been around others as well. What have you seen in them?
It's a really interesting one because obviously I've had my mental health experiences. I work in wellbeing now, and so I have a very different view from when I was young and first started to be successful, and it was quite old school. And how do you destroy yourself, and how do you endure anything and everything? And I have a lot of different philosophies now, and I also coach, and I've had athletes go to the Olympics that I've not coached them in a way that destroys them daily. Whereas that's obviously quite an old school mentality and still very prevalent in sport. But the thing is, you can't escape the fact that it has to be tough. It doesn't have to be tough every day, but you cannot escape the fact that you will have to give a pound of flesh. And that's not just physically. It might be emotionally, it might be mentally, it's socially with not being able to go do X, Y, and Z. It can be financially. That's the bit that I think people still struggle with to understand, is that there is a cost. And you do have to pay it. You can't get away from that. That for me is the big point to always remember for professional sport is it is a pound of flesh, and you will be paying it if you want to be successful.
Did you find it frustrating? And I'm going to get pretty crude about this. From an athletic and professional sport perspective, in my opinion, you do not get more professional than the likes of yourselves. But also, if you look at the levels of funding that athletes like yourselves get, it is mind-blowing in comparison to some of the, and hey, look, a lot gets levelled at footballers for various different reasons. But if someone's getting paid $300,000 a week and playing header tennis on a Monday and a Tuesday, and we know that you've gone to the well and back twice during the week in preparation for your race at the weekend, how frustrating is that? And I guess now you can look back on that. It's probably a lot more comfortable to be able to talk about it now than being in it. How frustrating was that, or is that, for current athletes?
So I don't look at it from other sports because obviously football do a fantastic job of selling the sport. Athletics doesn't. So athletics doesn't make money. So you can't suddenly start paying athletes with money that doesn't exist. Though obviously a lot of sports can try, and there's all conversations around that to be had. But for me, the frustrating thing was I was at 19 years old. I was top 10 in the world. I'd been to 2 Olympics and World European medalist, and my biggest contract I ever had was £25,000. And then my agent took their cut, and then I got taxed on that as well. And at that point, I was doing that training every single day, sacrificing absolutely everything. And you think, hold on, I went into the workplace retiring at 28 with no qualifications, no formal experience, and I got a damn sight more than 25 grand, and I'm nowhere near as good at my job currently than what I was in athletics. And I don't have to give up everything to do this. So it's not that I think you should get a ridiculous amount of money, but I do think that you should be able to be comfortable. And a big stress for me and a lot of people in track and field and Olympic sports in particular is there is actually financial stress and financial pressure. And that then influences my performance. So I worked 3 part-time jobs for the last 5 years of my career because I didn't have a contract. So when I'm meant to be recovering, when I'm meant to be focusing, I'm thinking about, I've got to go and do some work. I've got to speak. I've got to do these part-time jobs. Otherwise, I can't pay the bills. Yet the expectation of me is to go and win an Olympic Games. So it doesn't quite match up. And that's the bit that I get frustrated about is that lemonade budget, champagne lifestyle kind of expectation.
We hope you don't mind us interrupting this episode with a very brief shout out to our partners at the Podium Podcast, True Potential Wealth Management. At True Potential Wealth Management, their mission is to help you do more with your money. Expert financial advice, innovative investments, and leading technology are all designed to put you in control and help you achieve your financial goals. To find out more about their specialist advice, investment opportunities, and pension services, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk. That's domorewithyourmoney.co.uk. With investing, your capital is at risk. True Potential Wealth Management LLP is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Thanks for listening. Now, let's get you back to this week's show.
Simon, we've talked about this both within the podcasts and outside of them. Financially, one of the scariest things for athletes when they finish sport is what the hell am I going to do to pay the bills, as Jackson's talked about, but that was in career. It's interesting, isn't it, when actually we're talking about an athlete that is a medal prospect that is worried financially for how they're going to pay their bills. In terms of level of performance from what you do day to day, that needs to be changed, doesn't it?
Yeah, do you know, as Jack was mentioning that, I read up on the Kenyan athletes and the environment around Kenyan athletes a few years ago. And when they were absolutely at their best, there was a really, really simple philosophy that they worked to. Basically, they kind of run, eat and sleep, and that's it. And when they were asked about, kind of, why is that such an amazing formula? The answer was because there's nothing else in there. It's just eat, sleep, run, eat, sleep, run, eat, sleep, run. That's it. And if you throw something else in there, you actually disrupt it and it's not as powerful anymore. And so when they were talking about, how is it that this simple formula creates world champion after world champion? The answer was, well, because there is no meeting with your agent, sponsorship thing, whatever it is. We're not throwing all of that in there as well. It's just eat, sleep, run, eat, sleep, run, eat, sleep, run. And I think you're absolutely right. Anything else that we throw in there potentially could disrupt it. We think that more is better, when actually, there's a phrase that's existed for many, many years: less is more, which in many cases probably is true. So perhaps what we need to do is look at stripping things out and getting back to doing the basics exceptionally well, rather than trying to shove more in. I'd be really interested, actually, Jack, you mentioned coming out of athletics with no sort of paper qualifications, as it were, and walking into a workplace. But what do you feel that athletics kind of almost did qualify you for through your experience? A friend of mine calls himself a QBE, qualified by experience, rather than qualified by paper qualifications. Mm-hmm. What do you reckon that the experience gave you that maybe paper qualifications didn't?
It's interesting because actually it's my poor mental health and the work I've done in that's kind of put me in the position after my career, and athletics is kind of the gold dust. The fact that I've been to 2 Olympics, I've got a medal here and there and so on, it's suddenly you get respect, and you know what it's like. You be in sport, everyone is fascinated by sport and high performance. That's the gold dust. So the experience for me, there's obviously lots of learnings we can talk about, from resilience, overcoming adversity, being able to be adaptable, and being able to work incredibly hard and have a large work capacity, and being able to endure. But for me, it was the gold dust. It's the showbiz side of things that's kind of helped push me through, because it's opened the doors. Because if I was just someone who'd struggled with mental health and was trying to find the opportunities that I've been fortunate enough to have, being head of wellbeing at BBC and the other things I've done, no one would have looked at me. But because I ran around a track fast, it was something like, oh, this guy's interesting, this guy's special. In reality, all I did was run around. But yeah, the showbiz bit is the gold dust for me. That's given me those opportunities, and very grateful for that.
Talk to us a bit about you've talked about it in the past, the mental health issues that you faced, how they affected you, and really where they ended up putting you. How did they sort of manifest themselves?
Yeah, so I was brutal. I was very old school in my mindset as well. I come from a single parent family down in East Kent, where not much happens at all, and struggling benefits and living in however many houses and so on. So not coming from an environment that you think, right, you can go and succeed. And I'd kind of got quite a hard edge of, well, it's all about working hard. It's all about being brutal and ruthless in a negative way, not a positive way. And I kind of went through like that. And I became very successful very quickly. I went professional at 18 and Olympics at 20, came fourth in London. And that's where things really changed for me. And I really struggled, because I had such a high expectation of myself, and I never failed. And I demanded so much, and I was so brutal, not only in the environments I was in, but predominantly to myself. And I then had the trigger of not achieving at an Olympics what I wanted to. And that's where I kind of really started to struggle. And I struggled for a long time because I didn't believe mental health existed. I thought it was made up. I thought it was for people who needed an excuse for being not as successful as me, or weak, or whatever it might be, because that's the environment that I come from. And yeah, it was a huge learning to go through that. And with a greater awareness of mental health and mental health issues, I can tell you I really struggled when I was young, particularly anxiety, and particularly around sport and perfectionism, fear of failure. But those are also the things that made me incredibly successful very quickly, that insecurity as such. So lots there that I'm rambling on about. Obviously, it's a subject I talk about quite a bit, and something I talk about with my athletes and try and support them with.
Simon, I think we've worked together when I had grey hair. Well, no, probably less grey hair, brown hair. I think one of the things that I have talked to you about in the past was that I felt like as a sportsman, I was always on the edge of not being, well, in my head, I was never good enough, but I was always on the edge of not getting to those levels that I wanted to. And I think there's a really fine balance between the anxiety that Jack talks about, the drive to get to the top, the sort of stubbornness that you show day in, day out as an athlete, and actually just breaking down full stop. And I'm not sure I'm that great at dealing with it now. I think it replicates itself in my life now in ways that probably aren't great. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's not just me and Jack. It's probably 99% of athletes, right?
And not just athletes. I mean, I think this is something that most people struggle with. I was chatting to a friend the other day about, that concept. There was a film. Don't know whether you guys have watched it. It's quite a few years ago. Mel Gibson. I think it was called What Women Want. And basically, it's like they had thought bubbles. He could read all the thought bubbles of everybody around him. And I reckon if we could read the thought bubbles and actually understand other people's experience, we'd start to figure out fairly quickly that this stuff is really common. And one of the traps, honestly, is that we think we're different. Whereas actually, I think we're in the vast majority, not the minority, when we feel this way, when we've got these self-doubts, when we've got the insecurities. I mean, it's pretty much the principal reason why I wrote my latest book, Silence Your Demons. Because I start out, one of the first sentences in the book is everybody has demons. That voice in your head, the nagging voice, the gnawing self-doubt and insecurity, everybody has that stuff. And, when people talk about the sort of the pressure that comes with expectation, it's, as we probably know from our own life experience, pressure is always self-induced. But the expectation and the pressure become an issue usually because we compound it all with self-judgment. We're not actually that scared about what other people think. It's really what we think. And I think perfectionism and that idea of perfectionism and the fear of failure starts to rear its head because there's like a snowball rolling down a hill effect here of I don't feel good enough, and the only way I'll feel good enough is if I hit perfection. I'm scared that I'm not good enough, and therefore I need to make sure I win the medal, win the trophy, achieve the thing, whatever it is, in order to then feel good enough. But because we never ever achieve perfection, we compound not feeling good enough, and then we need to hit perfection in order to feel good enough. So we perpetuate the whole thing.
Two points I'd come back with on that is I think a lot of sportsmen, Jack, say I'm talking absolute bollocks if you think so. I think all sportsmen realise that perfection's never going to come. So that's something that we all understand. Now, of course, we aim for it. But actually, if you ever get the perfect performance, you're probably, over your career, you're going to be like Usain Bolt week in, week out, which is not going to happen. Now, the other thing to say there is actually when you look at sports people outwardly, and they know they have to be like that, they're hugely positive. It's all about confidence. This outward show of it's almost bravado, I guess, and a bit of ego, when actually you scrape the front of it off, and there's a quivering mess inside. So what is it? Why is it that actually the negative? Is it because it's easier to be negative than positive? Does it come down to that?
I think we have a tendency to look at the 1% negative rather than a 99% positive, and we keep doing that. And again, we kind of exacerbate that if we don't feel good enough. Because the thing about identity, what we believe about ourselves, is that, like most beliefs, we look to confirm what we already believe. If we don't feel good enough, we'll look for evidence that tells us that we're not good enough, rather than looking for the 90-odd% of evidence that says that we're pretty good. I often say that confidence, belief, etc., is founded on evidence, but it's not the presence of that evidence. You've got to recognize it and appreciate it in order to feel it. And if you don't, it might not as well be there. So I think we have that tendency to always look for the negative, see the negative, and then convince ourselves that, we were right all along. We're not good enough. And just going back to a point you made earlier about fear of failure, I think it's a really, really powerful motivator. It's just not healthy. It can help us achieve amazing things. It can probably take us beyond where we thought we might be, but it's not healthy. It's not stable. It's not enduring. And therefore we probably need to swap out that driver. And some people, honestly, it's like they know it's not healthy for them, but they're scared to give it up because it's got them this far. They know that it's powerful. So it's like, I described it to a friend the other day about, this engine's got you this far, but this is a pretty worn out diesel engine. We ought to be swapping it out for a nice hybrid or electric engine. But at the moment, you're scared to give it up because it's got you this far.
Jack, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Oh, there's so many things.
Not your diesel engine.
Not a diesel engine. But confidence is evidence is an amazing thing, right? So it's talked about. But the problem is that I don't actually think it's wrong, but the problem is we look at confidence as evidence as the overall thing, rather than the confidence in the small journey and process and the actions and behaviors, and having confidence around that. So I talk with leaders and managers, and they're like, oh, well, I'm not an experienced manager, so I don't have confidence because I don't have the evidence. And I was like, yes, but what is it about being a manager or a leader that you are confident in? Is that in terms of the fact that you genuinely care and you have knowledge in your field and so on? So your confidence is the evidence in the smaller bits. And there's so many other things. Talk about fear of failure, which I still very much struggle with because I like to do things right. And overall, I tend to get things pretty good, pretty well done overall. A lot of the time, that when it doesn't, it's really hard. And something I learned from my first ever talk was a TED talk when I was living out in Florida. So I went big, talk about fear of failure. I went and did the big one early. But there was a Navy SEAL there. He was the head of suicide prevention for the military, because obviously there's a huge issue there. And he was talking about how they view conflict. And he talked about C or T, challenge or threat. And I love this because I wanted to be able to apply it to my everyday. And that is, if you view a situation or an environment as a threat, we go very natural into that fight, flight, freeze, and we're looking at everything as danger. It's a threat. We're looking at the negative, which we're kind of programmed, hardwired to do. There is no clarity in that moment. You are not able to think clearly. Any good kind of reaction from that is a little bit of luck. It's not something that has that clarity. So if you start to view your environment as a challenge, straight away, that's just that word is far more positive. It's almost like a game. It's just challenging to see what I'm up to. What have I got in the tank? What have I done previously that can lend to this? It's just a little measurement that isn't this finite thing that's all or nothing. And that was an amazing learning for me to understand that C or T. And let's be honest, for all of us, how often are we genuinely under threat? Very, very, very rarely, probably never. So I think that's an amazing way to start looking at those environments that you might start to feel the nerves and anxiety or the worry. Is it, a challenge, or am I being threatened here? Predominantly, it's a challenge.
I think that's, oh my God, if I'd known that while I was playing, Jack, we should have met years ago. I think that whole
problem.
Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing some of the things we learn now, actually, and you just think, and I try and sort of shift this on to my 12-year-old in sort of simplified fashion, but if I saw some of the comments that I was given by England coaches at the time, or if I viewed potential or people that I felt were in my position within teams or teams I aspired to be involved in, if I saw them as a challenge, as opposed to these guys are a direct threat to me, my approach to it would have been completely different. And that's an amazing way to really simplify any situation that we have in life. Because, Simon, myself, you and Justin that works on this podcast as well, we've spoken off the podcast about some of the things that we've all faced and that I've faced over the past sort of months within work. And the bit that I know sometimes I do wrong, which is right, head down, work harder, get darker, get deeper, go longer, going to the well, as Jack talks about. I'll do that day to day if I feel that there's a threat. Whereas if I challenge myself, maybe I don't go as far into that well, but I'm a much more efficient way of working within that situation. That's a brilliant way of looking at it.
Yeah, and as you said, our brain flips into problem solving mode. Because it's like a jigsaw puzzle or whatever it is, that's how it appears to us, rather than something we need to escape from or defend from or whatever. It becomes a problem to solve, and our brain deals with it very, very differently. Our brain's brilliant at answering the question that we give it, and often we give it a stupid question, and by giving it a stupid question, it then solves that thing.
I can only give stupid questions.
But I mean, if you think about some really simple examples, why can't I ... If that's the question that your brain asks, then you'll find all the reasons why you can't do it. You're not good enough. They're the answers that will naturally follow. If you think, how could I ... your brain will start finding solutions for you. And it's just understanding the difference between those sorts of questions. And as Jack said, the emotion drives it. If you feel under threat or you feel If you're criticizing yourself or whatever, your brain's more likely to slip into why can't I mode rather than how could I mode. But if we can just understand how to create that subtle shift, then we get massively different outcomes.
Jack, was the with regards to that and those thought processes, and you mentioned your struggles with mental health, was your transition therefore a process whereby it felt like it was a weight off your shoulders as opposed to a weight on?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I chose to retire at 28 when technically I could have made the next Olympics. I was actually in really good shape, probably the best shape I'd ever been in. You peak between 28 and 32. And the bravest decision I ever made was retiring from sport at 28, because society doesn't really understand it. If you don't understand mental health or you don't know me, most people still don't really get it. But I wasn't willing to sacrifice myself anymore for something I didn't believe in. And it's interesting because at that point I was ready to move on, because I knew what was important to me and I'd built that awareness. But something I kind of want to touch on that's been mentioned a few times is around endurance and enduring. And it's something that I've only really recently started thinking about and now talking about a lot. I have always been rewarded and celebrated for my ability to endure. My nickname was the Green Machine because I didn't show pain, I didn't show weakness, I didn't show anything, and I was proud of that. I had a nickname that was 2 hearts, 4 lungs because I just kept going. And I would always outwork anyone. So I was rewarded for that. And particularly in sport, particularly in business, the person who's there the longest, who works hardest, brilliant, we'll reward them. It's a fantastic trait to have, but we don't understand the difference in what we should be enduring and where our endurance should be spent. And this is where I go wrong, and sounds like a similar thing with you, Tom, is I will endure absolutely everything because I know I'm strong, because I know I can, because I can take on things more than other people and I'd want to help them. Don't worry, I'll take that. I can deal with that. So I take on everything and I deal with everything, or try to deal with everything. Not everything needs to be dealt with. And that's what I'm trying to learn from an enduring point of view, an endurance point of view, that, do you know what? Some things I do need to use this special skill that I have. But some things I need to nip in the bud early doors and set boundaries to say, no, this isn't something that's right. This isn't good for me or my environment. I am not enduring this. Instead of what my normal is, because of sport, is that I will take everything. Throw it at me, I will take it. And that's something that we've mentioned endurance a few times, and I wanted to be able to communicate.
It's really interesting because, I was never, I've mentioned it before on these podcasts, I was never the fastest, never the quickest, never the most skillful. But if you give me something to go at, I'm not going to stop. And that probably came across a bit in the way I played at times. Basically an absolute pain in the arse. But I think, there is an element of that which you have to have as a sports person. But I think the understanding of that is really important, and probably, this podcast is perfect for me right now. I feel like I'm sort of having an ability to right all of my day-to-day wrongs. But the whole thing of, my transition was, I felt like I was in a good place, but actually for 3.5 years, I was all over the shop. And really, I was just like, right, I'll suck up that pain, whether it's to do with my partner at the time, who's now my wife. I'll suck up that problem. Don't you worry about it. I'll deal with it. Now, whether I addressed it or not, I dealt with it. And it meant that actually everyone else in my environment, as far as I could see, had no pressure. I'll just take the pressure because I'm the one that can take that. And actually, I don't think that's it's not good because especially when you're someone like me who finds it very difficult to talk about that, you end up bottling it, and it comes out in negative ways. So allowing those people that were around me to I don't know, feel better in themselves, even if it was to the detriment of myself, I was much more comfortable with that than the other way around. And why is that, Simon? Why do sports people do that?
Well, I think there's there's a different change of perspective here, because you're right. And as you guys have both said, if you want to succeed, you have to, push yourself. And whether as Jack calls it, that well that you go into, you have to push yourself into it. And that the work ethic's a good thing. That there will be times where you probably do have to endure to a certain extent. But the flipping mindset often on this one is that if you are enduring the pain, by definition, you don't want it. You'd rather not have it. If you could wish it away, you would do, but you're going to put up with it for the end, for the outcome. And I think whenever we sacrifice the moment for the outcome, we put ourselves in a vulnerable position. Those people who I've met who have become really good at what they do sustainably view it almost like as exploration. And it's not, all right, it might be kind of physically uncomfortable to be there, but they don't curse that moment, as it were, because they are enjoying being there in a different way rather than just enduring it. And because I think you're right, if you keep taking stuff on the chin time after time after time after time, the end result is you're going to get beaten up by life. And you'll come out the other side probably weaker as a result of it. And I think the way that you interact with this stuff is absolutely critical. Doing it on your terms, doing it because you choose to do it. And this is, again, where that flip from being driven by a fear of failure, whereas it almost becomes your default and you can't not do it. You hate it. You don't want to be there, but you're scared that if you don't, then something terrible is going to happen. That's very, very different than choosing to be there because you want to, and because this is part of a journey that you're willingly undertaking to explore your potential. And therefore, I think that whole experience becomes very, very different depending on how you engage with it in the first place.
I think I'm a reflection of that in my life. So I don't say no to anything.
Mm.
In that, I will work Monday to Friday in a day job. And then if there are opportunities to work on a weekend, I don't say no. I've just got to take that on and do it. Now, clearly you have to pay the bills or whatever and all that sort of stuff. But I won't say no to anything. I'll just say, yeah, do it. And then I'll have to deal with the impact of that, whether it be on myself, my time, my sleep, my rest and recuperation, my family. My family has to deal with it. The individuals around me have to deal with it. So actually, I'm taking on the endurance, but actually it's almost overflowing onto them because I don't have the ability to deal with it. So from that perspective, Jack, did you find, so leaving sport, you finished enduring? Or, how do you look at it from that perspective? Were you enduring and that was what made you step away, or?
I think it was the choice piece. So what Simon's talking about there. So I don't believe in sacrifice. All of this conversation has been around language, hasn't it, and perspective for a lot of this, and it's how we view things. And so I never say sacrifice because I chose to do those things. I didn't sacrifice. I chose to put myself in positions that I went without, or I had to endure this. That's what it is. I didn't give up anything. I chose to do something else. So that's really powerful, being able to understand it from that and acceptance of that as well. But from a transition point of view, if you look at it on paper, I've probably done really well. Someone said to me the other day, wow, to come from sport to do what you've done is amazing. But I still struggle now. I don't quite get business. It's not sport. It's not simple. There's no simple measure. I don't have the social. It's not high performance in the way that I'd like it to be. It just doesn't really make sense. And I really struggle with that. But I accept that it's different.
Yeah.
And I also accept the reasons why I'm doing it. So for me, I'm hopefully starting a family soon, and with my partner, and that's a really exciting thing, and that's my huge driver. Why am I doing this? Why am I enduring certain things? Well, it's because I'm doing this for my family. And as long as that is there, cool, let's go. But I don't endure for no reason anymore, or for a made up idea of what success is. It is, can I facilitate an environment for the people I love and I care about that is healthy? And that for me is absolutely everything. And that's when I will endure. And something that I also had to learn is more is always more. Doesn't mean it's better. If your thing is always looking for more, you'll always find it, and it will never be finished. And then you'll never find any fulfillment whatsoever. So find out what is important in the more and do that rather than just find more.
And this I think is a really, really critical point, because, you know, if you think about what it is that lures people into the trap that we've been talking about so far, sometimes it's the fact that we haven't really decided ourselves what success looks like. We've gone for the default. Success is winning, and, you know, failure is losing. Just falling into that one. It's one that we discussed with Kath Bishop on a podcast a little while ago. But, you know, I can remember giving up on a challenge that I took on because the choice was either I complete the challenge and I see my wife suffering and I'm not there to take care of her, or I quit the challenge and I look after her. And I made a choice, and I said, look, the challenge is not worth it, honestly. If I had to swap between my wife's health and looking after her and completing this challenge, I'm not going to complete the challenge at that cost. It's a cost I'm not willing to pay. And so actually I kind of came out of it thinking, fine, I didn't finish it, but I actually feel like I made the right decision, and that equals success, honestly. And I think if we've got a really good, clear understanding, which is our own, of what success looks like, we put ourselves in a much stronger position. If we default onto the one that society feeds us, then we'll probably get caught in the trap.
That's probably where I find myself, I guess. the old default stage.
Yeah, most people do.
Yeah. I think it's been really interesting how a couple of those points, I think, certainly challenge and threat is amazing. Jack, I know you've touched on it. You've touched on a few of them, so I sort of know what's going to come out. But some of those techniques, some of the elements of the things that made you a successful athlete, what have you brought across into the business world that helps you to try and succeed in this new career?
I'm a voracious learner. I'm always, as much as I don't like failure, that's why then I'm a really good learner, because I try and put myself into an expert position as soon as possible. So I learn everything. I'm good with just connections and relationships, which has come from sport, being able to have different cultures and environments and being able to chat with people and be social, and that we all know how much that helps with business. And I have a kind of intensity that I don't think I don't want to call people average. I don't work that way, but your normal person in a working environment doesn't have an intensity that I can bring, because I've been to places, and you have, Tom, through training, that most people have never ever been to or realize they are capable of doing. I have an awareness of what I am capable of doing that 99% of people don't. And that means that I can go that extra bit. And that has been really powerful for making my way through in business. And I think performance is just special, isn't it? And if you've been a performer, you find ways. You've been through environments, you've been through challenges. You've got so many tools in the locker to overcome adversity, because you've had to deal with it almost on a daily basis, and not on a huge scale, but just little challenges, little obstacles. How do we get through this, and how do we go through it? But like our whole conversation, it's finding the healthy side of that as best we can, and being able to manage that. And what I mean by healthy isn't that we don't do anything and it's all happiness, rainbows and unicorns. It's having boundaries around all those super kind of skills that we have.
Absolutely. Positive choices.
My daughter wish it was all rainbows and unicorns. That life would be amazing if it was like that. I'd have far less strife in my life. Jack, four of the simpler questions you'll face in life, and they fall to me to ask them, obviously. If you hadn't been a professional athlete, what would you have been? And is there another vocation that took your interest?
I had no interest in sports as a kid. I wanted to be a zookeeper or an archaeologist. I like animals and dinosaurs, but in reality,
yes,
I probably would have been a teacher. I like teaching. I like helping people. And yeah, if there wasn't so much paperwork, I probably would have gone into that at some point.
Oh God, yeah. Two things. The most hated thing, I think, I would say two things, but it definitely comes down to one. Sports people are terrible at paper admin. It's probably the same for everyone, right, Simon? I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who is the person you admire most in sports and in business?
Our CEO at Champion from business, Harry Bliss, he's the reason I joined the company. He is an exceptional individual. For someone who doesn't have any experience, we've just been acquired in the last how many months for quite a large sum, and he's done that from his garage, like a lot of startups, and to see his ability to learn and take on criticism as such is incredible. And the tenacity is very impressive. And from a sporting aspect, I was very lucky to learn from Di Green, who won the World Championships. I joined his training group when I was 18, 19. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have learned so much so quickly and been successful. I wish I'd had all the learnings I had now. But in terms of professionalism, navigating the world of elite sport, if it wasn't for him, I would have taken a lot longer to kind of adjust from being a junior to a senior.
And you've got some funds to invest. Where would you invest them? I guess you would have stuck them into Champion, but let's say you have to invest them somewhere else.
I didn't. I wish. Well, if we could predict COVID, we would have gone back and done that and all of that jazz. But you know what? I think there's a bit of a well-being revolution, and I think there is in the world that Champion's in. I think there is a bit of a revolution around kind of healthcare and tech at the moment, and how we can provide a quality and standard of healthcare to as many people as possible and make it as accessible as possible. That's obviously parts of that we're trying to do with Champion, but I think there is a really big picture with that, and it's becoming a busy space, but I do think that's because there's opportunities.
Yeah.
And the last one, I'll put you out of your misery then. You can only watch one film for the rest of your life. What would it be?
It's nearly Christmas, and my dog's called Buddy, and I love Elf, so we're watching Elf. If it wasn't this time of year, I might not have said that, but yeah, that's going to be happening in the next week or so. So there we go. It's at least going to be for the next month, maybe not the rest of my life.
If you're going to be watching that in the next week, it's November, Jack. You're not allowed.
December 1st, everything happens.
That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. My kids are hunting out the radio stations that are constantly playing Christmas songs already. I'm not having any of that. Not having any of it at all.
Send them down my way.
Jack,
we like that.
It's been so good to have you on, Simon.
Absolutely brilliant.
I mean, that's brilliant. Been so good. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
No, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Take care.
You're listening to Podium Podcast with Simon Hartley and Tom May. This is the show that invites the world's top athletes to discuss life in and after professional sport. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential Wealth Management. To find out more, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk.